Okay guys, welcome back to another episode of Rotten Reviews. On this episode I take a look at Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow from 2004. It has Jude Law, Angelina Jolie, and Gwyneth Paltrow. It is 71% fresh on the tomato meter and a rotten 46% on the audience score. I'm going to certainly agree that it is rotten. It is laughably rotten, laugh out loud rotten, or offensively rotten if you want to take this seriously. But see, the point is, if you're going into this as an adult looking for an action adventure of some kind, or a sci-fi action adventure, maybe some romance, you will be offended or you will laugh out loud at the sheer stupidity, plot holishness, ridiculousness, and bad CGI. However, if you are between the ages of 6 and 8 years old, this is passable. This is like a fun kind of a rip-off of Indiana Jones with a weird kind of visual style that would later be seen in an R-rated Sin City movie. But this is a 6 to 8 year old rip-off of Indiana Jones, and if you were 6, 7, or 8 years old, this wouldn't be offensive at all. In fact, it was probably quite enjoyable to see as a popcorn flick in the theater. But as an adult of any age, looking back on this, even as a teenager looking back on this in 2019, it's very offensive and completely stupid. Now, I sat through this whole thing just within the last hour to refresh myself on it. I had originally seen this on home video, on DVD, and I'm glad I saw it for free, because even being over the age of 30, I would have found it quite bad. I immediately excused the visual style and just watched the whole thing. You know, I almost couldn't take my eyes off of it because it's just so weird looking that I couldn't stop watching it, although there were moments here and there where I felt like I should have just shut it off. But I didn't. I actually made it to the very end of the movie to see its just thrilling conclusion. And all along the way, I saw what it was trying to do. It was basically it was like I don't know, a ripoff of Indiana Jones, only a really bad ripoff of it. Now, if I were 6 or 8, this would have worked. The humor, there were a lot of attempts at humor that I don't think worked, and I don't think they would have worked on 6 or 8 year olds either, but they were honest attempts to make a funny action adventure. It had some, even some one-liners thrown in there that just were so ineffective that it was easy to miss them. They might have gone right over your head, but there were attempts at a Marvel-esque type of humor from time to time in this movie. But it was so cartoonishly stupid. Not the CGI, mind you. I consider that passable as a type of visual style. But it was just so cartoonishly stupid plot-wise, and the plot was very contrived and by the numbers for what a Saturday morning cartoon would have presented. And so I say that this is flat out geared toward 6 to 8 year olds. Nothing about this is offensive to a 6 or 8 year old, yet it just doesn't hit like comedically enough for them. So I don't know, being that I was 6, 7, and 8 years old in the 1970s, I can't really tell you how this would have struck me if this had been released back then. But that's my thought on this, and I can see why it's considered 46% rotten. I would say it should be lower on the rotten score because, you know, kids don't go on Rotten Tomatoes to leave reviews, so I'm kind of wondering why this isn't more like a 26% audience score. Somehow enough adults considered this passable in some regard. I don't know why. That's why I want to go through and look at the actual audience reviews and find out where it's diverging from what I think it should be. And then again, the critics at 71%, I'm completely shocked that the critics found anything of value in this, because the comedy misses, the plot is completely so full of holes that it's Swiss cheesed, and the visual style is, you know, it's a good attempt to make a type of visual style. It reminds me very much of Sin City, but there's nothing, you know, it almost strikes me more like a Lucasfilm bad CGI, like Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones type of CGI, in that the actors are clearly in front of green screens almost 100% of the time. It's very off-putting, and I don't know why the critics would have given the 71%. Maybe that's something to explore as we move through it. But let's get right to the audience reviews. Half a star. It was simply terrible. Poor acting and poor graphics do not a good film make. Yeah, I'll agree on that. Again, the poor graphics, it's somewhat of a visual style, so I'm not saying that the CGI is a total fail. Um, it doesn't offend me in the way that the CGI in the Star Wars prequels offends me, because the Star Wars prequels expected the audience to take that serious, like 100%, and yet this is definitely meant to evoke some kind of blurry comic book look like the movie Sin City had. It's a visual choice, so it doesn't offend me. But poor acting, yeah, the actors just pretty much phoned it in. Gwyneth Paltrow and Jude Law are presented as having some kind of history that we don't know the details of. They have some kind of romantic history that the movie can't explore because it's, well, it's geared for children, so it's very shallow compared to what we got in the first Raiders of the Lost Ark movie, and yet it's trying to mimic that, but in a very shallow way, trying to play it very safe, just dropping hints that there's some romantic backstory, and yet it doesn't work. Both of the actors don't seem to have much chemistry. It's apparent that they're just going through the motions. It comes across as very contrived and shallow, so that could be the poor acting. There were also some kind of strange choices. Right off the bat, we're introduced to a German scientist. Now, this is a German scientist that has escaped from Germany, and his name is Jorge Vargas. I mean, right off the bat, that's kind of an odd choice, don't you think, of nomenclature for a German scientist of the time period between World War I and World War II? Yeah, sure, Jorge Vargas. Yeah, okay. It's really strange like that in a lot of ways. Again, if you're 6, 7, or 8 years old, you wouldn't have caught that. But even a teenager, this doesn't fly. Let's move on. We have a, well, first of all, let me tell you, if I have to put a star rating to this, I'm going to give it 2 stars. The visual style attempt was good. It's not my type of film, right? But then again, I didn't really appreciate Sin City either. But I see what they did. You know, it's like that old joke where you say, you know, I see what you did there. So I'll give it 2 stars for the effort. But it doesn't get any higher than 2 stars. There's nothing here that works, even for a kid. I don't think they would have found enough humor in it to be enjoyable. They might have gotten bored. So we're at May 9th of 2019, so obviously people are still watching this. It is actually currently to be found running on, for example, HBO, and I believe it's still streaming on Netflix, so it's still relevant today. People are still watching this and wondering what the hell they're looking at. Um, 2 stars again. Pretty poor. Got bored watching. I watched the whole thing and found it to have all the chemistry of a wet paper towel and all the excitement of a grass growing competition. I actually got bored watching it. Yeah, I'll agree with that. There were some times that I got bored enough to stop it, but it was just visually weird enough to keep me finding out where it was going to go. But I largely agree. There were some stretches that I was just about on the edge of shutting it off, but I didn't. 1 star. What a shame. A failed experiment by a director who has nothing else in his resume. Just a year later, this comic book style was perfected with Sin City. Yeah, I'll agree. This style came to prominence and actually got its due in Sin City. Again, that's not my type of movie. It's also R-rated, so you can't really make a comparison between that and this, other than the visual style is very reminiscent of that, like a dark comic book style that's trying to look comic booky and unreal. But in this case, it's more offensive. It almost comes off like, you know, the bad CGI of the Phantom Menace. That's my opinion. 1 star. Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow is nothing more than style over substance, made worse by its preachy attitude. You know, I don't agree with that. I don't think there was a preachy attitude. The plot kind of was nonsensical in that they were trying to stop a mad scientist from launching his gigantic rocket into space, which was basically a Noah's Ark type of rocket. However, I'm not sure why they needed to stop him so badly, because so what? If a billionaire wanted to launch a Noah's Ark into space, why not just let him? I don't understand why this was an evil plot and he had to be stopped. The movie made no sense in that fashion. Um, One star, the worst excuse for a film in a long time. Way too much Vaseline smeared on the camera lens. Why didn't the producers hire a scriptwriter? Someone could have come up with some words to substitute for the thin, unredeeming words that were spoken. Yeah, very cliched, plot-wise and dialogue-wise. All the things that happen in the plot happen because they need to happen, and they're just trope-like. They're very cliched, very contrived. Again, for a 6, 7, or 8-year-old, this would have worked, but not for anybody older than 8. This would have just been stupid. As far as the Vaseline on the camera lens look, that's the CGI look. There's some of that in Sin City, and again, it reminds me very much of the Star Wars prequels. You get that fuzzy look to it, and you know the funny part about that fuzzy look to the CGI is that towards the beginning of the movie, Gwyneth Paltrow's character goes into a movie theater of the time, and she sits down in the theater, and on the screen in the movie theater is playing the actual Wizard of Oz film. And the funny part is that Wizard of Oz film playing on the screen actually looks more real, you know, set in its fantasy world of Oz, than the surroundings of that movie theater that are all done in CGI. And it came across to me as being a deliberate choice to show you that the CGI in this supposed real world was worse than what was done in The Wizard of Oz. I could tell this was deliberate, but it had the opposite effect. It kind of like took me out of the story right away and reminded me that a movie that was made in the 1930s actually looked better than this movie did that was supposed to take place in the 1930s, but was done with modern technology or 2003 technology. It was very strange, but literally, if you watch this, pay attention. The Wizard of Oz playing on the movie theater screen is the most real looking thing that you see in the first 20 minutes of the movie. It is that's how fuzzy and bad the CGI looks. But again, it's hard to argue that that's the fatal flaw of the movie, because I think that was the visual style they were going for. But yeah, Vaseline or fuzz is what I think of as just somebody put fuzz over the camera lens. 5 stars. We're in 2018 reviews now. Such an underrated movie. I only know of 2 other people outside my family that have seen this movie, and I introduced it to them. Always in the mood to watch this. Well, if you're all 8 years old, but if you're over 8, I find it hard to believe you enjoy this. 3 stars. It's definitely a fun ride, even though to override its sloppy storytelling, but the dated graphics and production do it no favors these days. Again, I don't think the visual parts are the real flaw here. The plot is very nonsensical. The geography is nonsensical. For example, New York City, not only does it look barren of any people, although there are cars on the roads, there are no people walking around in a city of millions. So you get this weird sense of a gigantic New York City with all this stuff going on, but there's not a single person in sight. It looks very empty. And then on top of that, right outside New York City, within 5 minutes of airplane flight distance, is some kind of gigantic mountain range that surrounds like a forested area. It's very strange. It's like a New York City that sits at the base of Mount Fuji. It's very weird. So it's not only just an alternate history fantasy, but it's like maybe it's on an alternate planet, because the geography is a complete fail right from the beginning. 1 star. Absolutely horrendous on every possible level. Narrative, it's a stretch to call it even coherent, let alone compelling. Acting, as flat as the CGI backgrounds. Special effects, even movies from the 20s and 30s, which this clearly aspires towards, have aged better and look more interesting than this. Truly a slog to get through. Yeah, like I said, they actually show a real clip from The Wizard of Oz, and it looks better than what this movie looks like. And again, that seemed like a deliberate choice to do that to the audience. I don't know, because it seemed to be a negative aspect to the film, but yet for some reason the director thought that that would be cool and would make the audience appreciate this more. It's very weird. I don't get the logic of it. 5 stars. Think of a blend of movies from around the 40s, comic books from the first half of the previous century, and mix that together, then use current technology to create a movie from the mix. Great movie. They don't tell stories like this anymore, or do they? No, this is like flat out just ripping off Indiana Jones, adding airplanes that fly underwater. Yes, I said airplanes fly underwater like submarines and dogfight underwater and then go back up into the air and fly like airplanes again. That's correct. Only imagine that inside of an Indiana Jones movie, something like Temple of Doom. It's got the same kind of visuals, the same kind of music, the same kind of contrived plot things going on. Even a section in Nepal, like Raiders of the Lost Ark, that's done in the same way, except it's done in a lot worse of a way for 8-year-olds or 6-year-olds. It is very strange, but clearly there was an attempt to rip off the Indiana Jones franchise and, I don't know, reproduce it for 6-year-olds. A 12-year-old, which is what I was at the time I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark in the movie theater, would have never sat through this movie. I would have walked out because that's how childish it is. Half a star. Truly awful. Incongruity is the worst attribute possible in film. And I'm sorry, but you just don't make a campy retro sci-fi with Gwyneth Paltrow and Jude Law. Please. Yeah, they were very miscast. It showed because they weren't trying very hard or they never put in a real attempt, but they had no chemistry together. They didn't fit within the story. And you know, there was a large chunk of the first part of the movie that just kind of had Gwyneth Paltrow in high heels from the 1930s. Well, she actually looked like she was dressed in 1940s apparel, but that's a nitpick. Gwyneth Paltrow was running around in heels between CGI robots and on otherwise empty streets, and kind of just slow, not even running like with some tension, but just kind of hobbling around the street, avoiding the giant legs of robots, looking for her camera. Uh, it was very strange, and that was boring, even though it was supposed to have action. Gwyneth Paltrow wasn't really performing as though she was in danger. She just looked like she was lost amongst the green screens that she probably saw that the audience didn't see. I can imagine her just running around between walls of green screens and the director shouting, "No, okay, jag left. No, jag right. Okay, no, stop, turn, turn. No, turn now, I said. Just kneel down. Okay, stop. Okay, get up now, run over and try to grab your camera. Oh, what camera? Okay, pretend like there's a camera. Reach down and grab something. Okay, do it again." Like, that's what it seemed like she was just lost being directed by somebody, and she was just seeing walls of green screen. It was almost a part that I felt like turning it off, but it just looked so weird that I had to keep watching, and I finished it. I'm kind of glad I did because it got so much more wacky and interesting as this thing got closer to its conclusion. 1 star. Amazing how the director was able to coax such terrible acting out of an otherwise great cast. Yeah, it's like, to me, it doesn't seem like they were directed to act strangely. It's just that they didn't care. They knew this movie wasn't going to be so great. Maybe they knew that when they were just surrounded by walls of green screen, and at some point they just decided to phone it in because they were just going to get paid and get through this thing. That's the way it came off to me. They weren't really trying. 3.5 stars. December 2017. A forefather of the CGI age. It's more impressive now than when I saw it as a kid. Worth a watch. Again, if you were 6 or 8, this was impressive. It's not impressive now. It simply will strike you as, reminding you of things like The Phantom Menace, how bad they looked. 4.5 stars. A great looking film with a lot of excitement. The vastly underrated Sky Captain is a fun romp where comic book inspired visuals and 40s style noir collide. Yeah, they do mention one thing, 40s style. Yeah, it's supposed to be set in the 30s, and yet the clothes look like more like 1940s clothes, and the cars look like what you would see driving around in the 1940s. But yet it's supposed to be in the 1930s and has dirigibles and stuff, and yeah, it's kind of a weird alternate history, but don't consider like the visuals to be time period accurate because, it's a film where you have World War II actual planes. The Sky Captain himself is flying a plane that would fit in World War II, not not closer to World War I with Zeppelins, but it would fit in with World War II battles. And he can fly that underwater like a submarine and then fly it back up in the sky again. So yeah, don't expect like stuff to be period accurate at all. It kind of just blends everything from 1920 something to 1940 something and calls it good. That's the least of the film's problems. So 2.5 stars. This is one of those films that I was always intrigued by. I remember seeing the DVD cover of this film at a video store and thinking to myself, wow, this thing has Jude Law, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Angelina Jolie in it. That must be really good. Years and years of my anticipation was met with a very interesting movie experience. Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow is neither a great film nor a terrible film. It is a strange mixture of old school sci-fi adventure, German expressionism. Wow, you're being too kind on this. And speaking of Angelina Jolie, she only shows up like in the last third of the movie, and then she kind of disappears for most of it. She has one sequence in which she pilots a squadron of planes underwater to attack a robot underwater, and then that's pretty much all she does. She rocket packs away out of the scene, so to speak. So she's not a major point in this. She's just a bit character. You just see continuously Jude Law and Gwyneth Paltrow for almost the entire movie, and neither one of them are trying very hard. So if you're looking at this like an Angelina Jolie vehicle, no, she's barely in it. Maybe for 15 minutes she's in it. 2.5 stars. Great concept. Far too many yeah right moments. You're being too kind. If you mean plot holes and contrived things happening where characters just like for whatever reason don't get killed by the bad guy for whatever reason, there's a lot of those, yeah. 4 stars. This film is about as closest it can get to the golden age of filmmaking, with the addition of a blue screen. The desired nostalgia maintained its satisfying course through the brightened cinematography within a similar structural framework and more or less in the editing and music, as well as the settled volume for the well-casted performances. Pretty much most of the aspects that the Golden Age effectively used, like how Carrie Conrad... Okay, I don't know what they're saying with this. They're really droning on like whoever this reviewer is thinks that they should be paid to do this professionally. Obviously not, because I can't even read what the hell they're saying. All I'll say is there's no golden age to this. It's just like an attempt to do a visual style that would later be done more effectively in Sin City. And it was aimed at 6, 7, or 8-year-olds, although it wasn't marketed that way. This movie was marketed to the general audience, so that's kind of a fail. 2.5 stars. Looks pretty bad, or it looks pretty but lacks a decent plot. Yeah, it has the plot that a 6-year-old would find enjoyable. It's pretty if you like that visual style. It's 2 stars. 3 stars. Sky Captain comes up a little short in the plot department, but its striking Art Deco stylings and special effects are at least enough to hold interest, and the movie does succeed in some way as reasonable escapism. Again, I'll agree completely if the target audience is no older than 8. 1 star. I don't mind silliness in a comedy, but this was supposed to be an action-adventure or sci-fi. It was as nonsensical as a comic book without the humor. Yeah, the humor didn't work. It tried. It had even attempts to do a Marvel-type one-liner humor. Didn't work. It flew over my head most of the time, but I saw some of it. I'm sure there was even more of it that I just didn't notice because it was failed. It just didn't work. It wasn't funny. 3 stars. Sky Captain comes up a little short in the plot department. Okay, I read that one already. Let's see what else we can find. We have February of 2017, 5 stars. I love it. It is a 1930s comic book brought to the big screen. Yeah, it's like a 1930s comic book brought to the big screen for 6 to 8-year-olds, and it's 2 stars. So 2.5 stars. It's a good movie to watch. 4 stars, unappreciated adventure film combining aspects of Indiana Jones and Tailspin, amongst others. Yeah, it's not underappreciated, but yeah, you're right. It ripped off Indiana Jones and Tailspin. 2 stars. Having finally sat down and watched all of this, I can appreciate that there were some SFX revolutions for the time, but it doesn't hold up well, and the characters are flat and lifeless. Story is passable, but not exciting or memorable. Yeah, it's only memorable that it, it just has like that fuzzy Phantom Menace CGI going on with cartoonish stuff. There were no revolutions here. Sat down and watched all of it. I can see that, a lot of people wouldn't have been able to do that on the first viewing. They probably would have had to do this 2 or 3 times to get through it. I sympathize completely. I'm surprised I was able to get through it on one viewing. I think it's just because, it was weird enough that I just couldn't stop watching to see how weird it got. And it got weird. Like at the end of this movie, it turned from an Indiana Jones thing into almost a dinosaur picture, and then dinosaurs mixed with flying robots. And I mean, they threw everything with the kitchen sink in here. There was nothing left to put in this thing. I thought it was going to become Jurassic Park at one part. It almost did. And then plot holes didn't stop. Like, for example, plot holes that revealed themselves within less than 3 minutes on screen. For example, in one scene, it is stated by Angelina Jolie's character that this mysterious island that they've discovered just can't exist. It's uncharted. What is it doing there in the ocean? And then less than 3 minutes later, she flat out states and shows another chart of the island and says, well, here's your way in through this underwater passage, and it's all mapped out, and here you go. We found the way in. What? So it goes from being an uncharted island to she's like denying that it can be there, to all of a sudden she has like a chart showing her the secret back door to get into it. This movie was full of stuff like that. It didn't even, it blew its own plot out of the water many times in the course of less than 5 minute stretches. It contradicted itself. But again, if you're 6, 7, or 8, you probably wouldn't have noticed this at all. So it would have worked, right? Half a star. I can't adjust this movie. I have literally watched this movie a dozen times and fell asleep every single time up until the 13th. Thank you, Coffee. It's so boring and too unbelievable. It took me completely out of the movie every time I gave this story any critical thought. As a period piece-like movie, I liked The Phantom way more. Damn it, The Phantom sucked. So they're okay. They're kind of comparing this to the Phantom movie, which is a lot older than this, I think. That was bad too, but yeah, you're right. The visual style is similar, except that Phantom movie, it actually had like less CGI. It had practical effects and painted backdrops, and this one was flat out like Phantom Menace bad CGI. So yeah, but there is that style. That's a movie I might take a look at on another episode of Rotten Reviews, The Phantom. I remember that as being rotten, and I'm certain that when I check, I'll find that it's rotten. 3.5 stars. February of 2016. When I was a bit young, I actually saw the poster for Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow on the computer. Not sure if I saw the trailer, but I thought it's a pretty cool poster. I haven't heard from this film until years went by that I saw this on Rotten Tomatoes. I was curious to see what the film is about and consider that it's on Netflix, now expired probably. I'll give it a watch, which turned out to be a really good movie. Jude Law and Gwyneth Paltrow are great, and the effects look outstanding. So, are you 8 years old? If you are, who paid for the Netflix? Just make sure when you watch things on Netflix that you get your parents' permission. This movie's okay. It is PG, but if you stumble upon an R-rated movie like Sin City, just make sure you ask mom and dad first before you start watching that. Just some friendly advice to be helpful. 3.5 stars. It is the visual appeal of this movie that makes it score so highly, as frankly the plot is a load of tosh, and there are a couple of sloppy continuity errors, both involving a camera, that really grate. Oh, there's more than a couple, okay? However, the style and concept are beautifully realized. Sky Captain is set in a future world that is basically a science fiction version of the 1930s. It's like an updated Flash Gordon serial. The actors are all live set against CGI sets and machines, and this aspect works superbly well. No, it doesn't. I'll disagree. And you brought up the camera with the continuity errors. Well, I'll bring up another problem with the camera. There are shots in this movie that it's obvious The director couldn't move the camera for some reason, and the camera location was set to show the CGI from a certain angle, and then when the actors moved into the field of view, in a regular movie, the camera would adjust to so that you could see them properly, but in this case, you could tell that the camera, for whatever technical reason, couldn't be moved from where it was aimed, and so you ended up with shots of the character that was supposed to be the center of attention would have half of their body cut off, and you just see their midriff and no head. And that's because, there were technical limitations, and the camera just got stuck in the wrong position to not track with the actors. So I'm going to bring that up since you brought it up about continuity errors. But, that's not continuity errors. That's just flat out the CGI sets themselves made keeping the actors in frame almost impossible sometimes. 1 star. Were it not for the leaden acting, incoherent script, sophomoric direction, and trite score, this film might have... Wait, that doesn't actually leave much, does it? Or indeed anything at all. I could say that some of the sets look nice, but there aren't any sets. The entire film was shot on digital green screen. I could say that some of the action sequences are good, the only saving grace of the last Die Hard film, except that frankly, they're not. I could say that the Art Deco inspired art and architecture, yeah, basically what they're saying, it's a piece of crap. It's all green screen, and, that does offend a lot of people. They can't take this seriously. There's more green screen here than the Phantom Menace, so if the Phantom Menace bothered you a little bit, this is really going to bother you. You're not going to be able to sit through it. 4 stars. Beautiful, hypnotic steampunk heaven. My kids and I spontaneously high-fived in joy at the very last scene. Seriously fantastic fun. Okay, if the kids were like 6 and 7 years old, fantastic. I'm glad they enjoyed it. But even in 2015, adults, yeah, they're not going to sit through this. It's still rotten. So let's take a look what we have here, and oh surprise, November of 2015, a 5-star review. People actually don't like this movie. What is wrong with all of you? I don't know. After my 8th birthday, I had my 9th birthday, and then came my 10th and 11th, and you know how it goes from there on, and now I'm well over the 40th and etc. I mean, I wish I was on my 25th, but we can't, turn back time, right? But obviously that's what happened. If I were still 7, I mean, maybe this would be the greatest thing I'd ever experienced for a year. 3.5 stars. Visually stunning romp that pays homage to the sci-fi serials of the 30s and 40s. Loved it. Well, yeah, the problem with that is nobody alive... even in 2003, there weren't many people left alive going to the theaters that remember those serials from the 1930s. There were some, certainly, but not enough of the right demographic that would pay to see this movie. So I'm afraid I have to beg to differ. 1 star. I keep going out of my way to rewatch this, hoping it'll be good. I am always disappointed. Don't go out of your way. There's a lot of other stuff on Netflix, even bad stuff that you can enjoy for the first time in some way. 3.5 stars. I am guessing this is not for everyone due to the mixed reviews you find on this movie. On the positive side, what a unique idea. I was not around in the 1950s, but this looks like the art and media you see from that time period, mixed in with the Jetsons' Buck Rogers style of what the future will be. It is a clever way to make cheap special effects and corny acting intentional. It is an action movie with an interesting mystery that can really suck you in if you give it a try. Just don't get put off by the strange way. I disagree. The movie wasn't making fun of itself. If it had attempted a straight-up comedy and it had been marketed properly as a comedy, this might have like a, this might have a solid 80% on the audience score if it had had comedy and it had been funny. But no. I'm afraid that's not what this movie was about. 0.5 star. Quite possibly the worst film I've ever seen. Rubbish script, rubbish acting, rubbish story. Just truly awful, and I've seen some shit films. Well, I'll disagree with you on that because I'm about to do a rotten review on something else called Movie 43. When you see that rotten review, or if you have seen that, then you'll agree with me. This isn't the worst movie out there by a long shot, especially not as current movies on Netflix go. 2 stars. I'll grant you it's got lots of shiny baubles and glitz, but zero substance and staying power. Yeah, if you just want to see a CGI extravaganza, but otherwise there's nothing here. 2 stars. I don't even like the visuals, and it's way too stylized. Decent musical score though. I largely agree. I give it 2 stars. 3 stars. This movie benefits from fast-paced action and fun Indiana Jones-esque vibe, but is unfortunately held back by dull characters and extremely dated CGI. 5 stars. Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow is an incredible film. It is about a series of attacks from giant flying robots in New York City, and a pilot and a reporter team up to discover their origins. Jude Law and Gwyneth Paltrow give amazing performances. The script is well written. Cary Conrad did a great job directing this movie. I enjoyed watching this motion picture because of the action and adventure. Sky's Captain in the World of Tomorrow is a must-see. I disagree completely. Yes, you obviously watched the same movie I did. You got the plot down, but how you suddenly discover, how you found this to be the pinnacle of movie making, I'll never understand. And you're outnumbered. So let's go through one more page, see what if we can find any interesting nuggets. 2 stars, didn't really care about this that much. 3 stars, it's a strange mix of strange parts, but what it comes out with, stylistically impressive and often engaging. Full review later. No, that's it. That's enough. I don't think it needs 3 stars though. 3.5 stars. Sky Captain is awesome. I loved it. It's as pulpy, as stylistic, as assured a movie as you will ever see. Filmed almost entirely on sound stages in front of blue screens, the movie simply exhumes the campy 1940s serials it so proudly homages. At the 15-minute mark, giant robots are walking the streets of New York City. If the movie has lost you at that point, there's no reason to keep watching. But if you're like me, if you adore, okay, yeah, you've made a good point there. It was when I saw Gwyneth Paltrow kind of wandering around New York between the legs of giant robots, and she didn't even look that stressed out by it. She just looked lost and confused. That's when I almost threw in the towel. Okay, but I'm glad I didn't because it got so much more worse. 3 stars, creative but bland at times. No, but I'll say creative and fuzzy most of the time. 4.5 stars. I freaking loved this movie as a kid. For some reason, when I watched it, have me a Bioshock feeling. If you're 6, 7, or 8, yeah, you could have probably loved this, but as an adult, we have to move on and consider that this is quite rotten. 3 stars, definitely captivating visually, but parts of the story felt cheesy, and some of the developments in the story didn't make sense. Good, but not great. That's an understatement. A whole lot of the plot didn't make sense. A whole lot of it was cheesy. But visually, yeah, sure. If you like that style, it was something to behold. Like I said, I finished it because I couldn't take my eyes off the craziness of it. 0.5 star. Another one I bought at the £1 shop in December 2014. Again, I could not get into it at all. It had been repacked as new, but not worth the £1 for me. This is from December of 2014. So a British person is saying that they paid £1 for this out of the bargain bin, I guess the British equivalent of the Target or Walmart bargain bin. And they weren't impressed with it. So yeah, I'll say given the exchange rate with the pound, they paid like $1.60 to somewhere between $1.60 and $1.80 for it. Um, that's probably fair. That's actually pretty cheap. But still, it doesn't make the movie good, does it? 2 stars. I wanted to enjoy this film, but just too badly written. Fake comes to mind. Bad script. Save your time. Yeah, 2 stars, but as a 6-year-old, I'm sure all of that was fine. 1 star. 10 years later, the visuals don't hold up, and the visuals were all this movie had going for it to begin with. The characters are vacuous. And 4.5 stars, vastly underrated. Okay, if you're a little kid, maybe. So I'll leave it there. I don't really, the 46% audience score, it's okay, but I'd believe it more if it were like 26%. The 71% on the tomato meter, that's the real mystery to me. Can I get a sense of why by scrolling down to these critics' reviews they list here? This debut feature by Cary Conrad is a triumph, not only for its technical mastery, but for its good taste. Okay, so it's the director. There's plenty of rotten reviews from the critics here, so somehow just the tomato, the fresh ones, it says top critics 43, Fresh 149, Rotten 62. So the critics were divided, but largely more critics just decided this was fresh. I don't know why, because I guess it's just the visuals, and maybe those are the critics that accepted that it was targeted to 6, 7, and 8-year-olds. Again, I don't believe that, because the marketing, the theatrical trailer, it wasn't playing with, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and etc. It was playing alongside other action movies that were rated PG-13 and above in the theaters at the time. So again, I don't trust that. I think the critics are out to lunch. I don't know what to make of that. So anyway, I've made my point on this. If you're 6, 7, or 8, I recommend seeing this one time. You may enjoy it. Otherwise, don't bother, please. There's other stuff on Netflix, and I am going to call this one and see everybody on the next episode of Rotten Reviews.